Well, it all comes down to these two. One, the CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, who is standing up to a backlash from activist employees. The other, a comedian who's reveling in what's happening and hoping that the dominoes don't fall and he's not removed from the platform. But there's going to be more pressure than ever this upcoming week. So, can the CEO of Netflix hold, or will Dave Chappelle and Netflix fall to these activists as so many before them have? Even though they represent such a small portion of the overall population, these activists, with ideals that are far out of touch with mainstream Americans, have been able to steamroll themselves into virtually everywhere. This coverage that you're seeing, which is pretty flattering of their upcoming protest of Netflix employees, is just part of the coverage that they have. I'll show you something else they're working on in just a moment. But here's what's going down that's going to increase and ratchet up the pressure at
A
Netflix.
less than picture perfect day for Netflix, the streaming giant bracing for a possible walkout led by transgender employees unamused by jokes in Dave Chappelle's new comedy special. News Nation correspondent Nancy Liu is live in Hollywood. So, Nancy, how many people could walk out?
Now, this is great. You throw it out to the reporter who's on the scene at Netflix. You are just one of so many media outlets that are amplifying the message of these activists. And really, in so many cases, running down the motivations and the behaviors of the CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos. And she should know, right? Like how many people are going to be there? What's going on? What are their demands? What do the employees want?
Well, Nicole, it's really not clear how many Netflix employees will take part in this planned walkout, but it is clear that a growing division is forming within this company. The latest Dave Chappelle comedy special has seemingly sparked more outrage than laughter.
All right, let me stop her there. She's got nothing. She doesn't really have any information that she's filling, and I'm not picking on her. She just doesn't. Look what's coming up next: transgender sports. It's not like this stuff is happening in a vacuum. This stuff is getting more coverage than virtually anything else out there. This transgender topic and discussion is virtually everywhere, every single day. It would be very hard for you not to encounter it with glowing coverage. Then, when somebody steps in, like Dave Chappelle, doing something that they call comedy, which seems to be on its last legs, the media acts like everybody is freaking out when we can see that they're not. You look at the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and over 2,500 people who bothered to go to this website and say their piece, 96% dug it. And I bet a couple more percent were like, meh. And then I bet, one tiny fraction of a percentage of a percent were like, this is hurtful and you got to take it down. And Netflix shouldn't be a part of this. Who cares about the 7 actual reviewers? So many people aren't even brave enough to review it. They just want to watch the coverage and go, bad, 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 and bring you to the ultimate equation. The ultimate equation is comedy, or anything else for that matter, speech that does not agree with what the radical trans rights advocates believe in is going to equate to danger, death, murders, all of these things of these incredibly, incredibly delicate transgender people. This is the whole equation that matters here. Because if they tell you how delicate the people are and they tell you how dangerous the rhetoric is, then they can shut it down. That's justification to do so. Here's the article just published on The Verge. Netflix just fired the organizer of the trans employee walkout. Oh my God. Well, what happened there? Netflix has fired a leader of the trans employee resource group who is organizing the upcoming October 20th walkout. The employee, who is Black and currently pregnant, so I assume probably not actually trans, but just leading the group, asked not to be named for fear of online harassment. They have been encouraging trans employees and allies to walk out of work in protest of Netflix's handling of the Dave Chappelle special, The Closer. The employee declined to speak to The Verge for this story, though it seems like maybe they did. All these white people are going around talking to the press and speaking publicly on Twitter, and the only person who gets fired is the Black person who was quiet the entire time. This is not true. They suspended multiple employees for bombarding an internal executive Netflix call. They only brought that employee on afterwards, I'm assuming after they made some sort of deal with him. The employee, though, was not just terminated for leading an uprising of these employees that are supposedly just outraged about this. The employee was fired because they allegedly leaked metrics, and they leaked them to the press related to the Dave Chappelle special. The metrics about how much Netflix paid for the closer and how many people it reached ended up in a report from Bloomberg. And this Bloomberg report says that like tens of millions or 10 million or so people have seen it, and they talk about the amount of money that Dave Chappelle ended up getting paid for this. A Netflix spokesperson confirmed the employee's dismissal. We have let go of an employee for sharing confidential, commercially sensitive information outside the company. We understand this employee may have been motivated by disappointment and hurt with Netflix, but maintaining a culture of trust and transparency is core to our company. Would you have them not have any control of their company? Is there anything wrong with Netflix trying to say, hey, you can't do this? Hey, we as a corporation do not have to bend over backwards to perfectly mirror, match, and shadow your political beliefs or your beliefs otherwise in the world of activism. But there's more. A Netflix star who's had to stand up on the platform, despite the fact that she doesn't have a huge following on many social media platforms. In a rare public rebuke, the Australian comedian Hannah Gadsby upbraided Mr. Sarandos, again, the CEO of Netflix, for his defense of Mr. Chappelle. Here she is on her Instagram. And this is a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. Because I guarantee if the CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, didn't mention Hannah Gadsby, she would have made issue with that. But he did, so now that's where we go. Make sense of this with me. Hey, Ted Sarandos, just a quick note to let you know that I would prefer if you didn't drag my name into your mess. Now, I have to deal with even more of the hate and anger that Dave Chappelle's fans like to unleash on me every time Dave gets $20 million to process his emotionally stunted partial worldview. Now, let me stop here for a second and just interject some actual logic and reason into this. And I'm sorry if you disagree with me. That's fine. You can leave the page or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, Dave Chappelle's entire special, the closer, was about his transgender friend. His transgender friend killed herself, not because of Dave Chappelle, not because of Dave Chappelle's supporters, but because of unending, vicious harassment by the transgender activists for being a turncoat, an Uncle Tom in their world. That's what happened here. And this is just so detached from the reality of the situation. Also, are we to believe that Dave Chappelle fans are really taking time to go bother Hannah Gadsby online to harass her? And maybe if you posted about it, like right now, they're going to say something. But I don't think Dave Chappelle fans are like, let's turn off the special. Let's crack the knuckles. Let's mean Hannah Gadsby notes. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that's a thing. Maybe a couple people here or there, but I don't think this is just a huge, massive issue she's dealing with. But she, too, seems to want to be a victim in the scenario. You didn't pay me nearly enough to deal with the real-world consequences of the hate speech dog whistling you refuse to acknowledge, Ted. F you and your amoral algorithm cult. I do S with more backbone than you. That's just a joke. I definitely didn't cross the line because you just told the world there isn't one, says Hannah Gadsby. And that's something. Meanwhile, on platforms like the New York Times, where they say Netflix is losing some of their glow because of the handling of the Chappelle special, let me bring you back to that reminder that the audience is perfectly happy with Dave Chappelle's new special. And millions of them, tens of millions of them even, have watched it and seemingly enjoyed it if you go by this audience score. But a tiny fraction of that audience is allowed to have an absolute monopoly on outrage. And ask yourself if that's right or if that's really annoying and probably actually doing a disservice to the transgender rights movement, which has made so much progress and progress that it should have made in the last 5 or 10 years. This, though, is a grand overreach. You are not allowed to control everybody else's speech that you disagree with. You are not allowed to draw all of the lines in all of the sands. You are not allowed to have that position. If you want to exist in a world of different ideas, you have to also be okay and handle, without ripping all your pearls off every time you hear something you disagree with, this with some sort of normalcy. Anyhow, over on the New York Times website, even their piece about Netflix losing its glow that trashed their handling of this special, because obviously we know they're going to never fall out of line with the trans activists. They are going to be lockstep with them. Otherwise, they'll face the end of the barrel themselves. Here's some of the users on the New York Times website. These are people who probably subscribe. They pay to read this paper. Firehorse, why are we not being allowed to have an opinion or question trans people without being demonized? As a woman, I'm deeply offended my actual gender and experience is seemingly able to be bought and paraded around without one word of acknowledgement and in fact told again by men. I am wrong in feeling that being a woman is not something that can be medically or financially attained. Dave Chappelle, J.K. Rowling, and myself have a right to our opinions without being shunned as trans people who also have a right to their opinion and lifestyle. All of these top comments are very, very much like this. From the tone of this article, it appears the world is rejecting, from the tone of this article, it appears the world is rejecting Chappelle and Netflix. But from the tone of every comment section in every article I've read on this story, the bulk of people support Chappelle and freedom of speech. And that rings true for me too. But these organizations have so much power and they take up so much of the oxygen in the conversation. Here's Glad retweeting, and they've been all over this. They say that from Ina Fried, they retweeted this. Netflix defends airing Dave Chappelle's special, saying they don't see a connection between Dave Chappelle's transphobic tropes and real-world violence. LGBTQ advocates Glad and Netflix's trans employees strongly disagree, and I report. I don't care if you disagree. I care if there's an actual issue here. And what happens is over and over and over, you have stories like this where they say LGBTQ advocates as well as trans employees at Netflix strongly disagree with this assessment, pointing to what the American Medical Association has termed an epidemic of violence against trans women. So let's dive into that, because that's the key point. What did I tell you? It's about taking some kind of commentary, whether it's a comedy stand-up or a book or anything else, and then it's about connecting it to these people that you suggest are so fragile that they're going to die as a result of it at the end of the rainbow. And they say record killings of trans people in the U.S. As of this Axios article, there were only 28 transgender people who had been killed. Now, they have added to that over here on hrc.org, and they have 40 transgender or non-conforming people that have been fatally shot or killed by other violent means. They go through and they list off these people, and you can see as I'm scrolling through here all of these names. And I encourage you to check for yourself, because every single one of these people issued here were humans that deserve to have a life. But they're also all people that there's no evidence in their case that supports an idea that some transphobe, especially some transphobe fired up by something that he read online or saw on Netflix, went out, targeted them, hunted them, and killed them for being transgender. In almost all of these cases, it's a domestic partner that is in a domestic altercation with them. It's a fight with their significant other that leads to the death. Or many of them are involved in dangerous areas of the economy, including drugs and other things. And drive-bys were the result, or the deaths were the result of drive-bys in several of these cases. Zero of these people, as far as I can see or tell, were targeted simply because they were transgender. There is not some mystery group of people watching Netflix, watching YouTube, watching videos like this, and then going out and hunting down people who are transgender. There are people who certainly disagree with them. There are people who say very mean and nasty and vicious things about those transgender people. But those transgender activists that targeted their name or their aim at Dave Chappelle's friend acted in exactly the same way, and even worse. They are even worse bullies in many cases. But it all comes down to one simple thing. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if Dave Chappelle's not bothered by this or if canceling's not a real thing. The only thing that matters is the Netflix CEO, Ted Sarandos. Is he going to cave, or will he stand firm? He said to his employees he believes he's on the right side of history and standing up for speech and people's performances. If he holds to that, and he's the first CEO to publicly push back and to do it successfully, it will be a major, major moment in this whole cluster F that we've been going through. And it'll show folks that you need to enter the arena with an interest in debating and having a conversation, not with an interest of telling everybody else what they must say, how they must say it, how they must do it, and what comedy they can have and what comedy they can't have, despite the fact that the overall audience just really obviously disagrees with you. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit the share button if you think somebody else should see this. And if you're new around here, facebook.com/thenewsjunkie. Hit that follow button over at youtube.com/thenewsjunkie. Hit subscribe. Thank you to all my supporters. Thank you. This is a big one too. And if you want to support me, you can see right down below how to do it. Hit support and you'll be off to the races. I thank you for that. I thank you for the comments that I'm going to be reading. I thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you again real soon.